Hi, welcome back to another Gadget Report. Let's talk gadgets. And today we are going to talk about the A380 a little bit more in detail. Last week I made that comparison between the A380 and the 747, and today I am going to talk about the A380 and why it might be considered one of aviation's flops. I'm going to try not to be biased. Obviously, you know that I've always loved the 747, the Queen of the Skies, but having said that, that does not mean that I dislike the A380 or anything like that. I actually think it was a very pleasant, or it is a very pleasant aircraft, and I enjoyed the trip that I did on A380. So that's that said, let's start and let's talk about the A380. So let's talk about gadgets and let's talk about the A380. I'm looking at my notes, and today's video, I took all the information. I provided a few details last week about all the specifications of the A380. Today I found this thesis from Christopher Nelson of the University of Oregon in the US, and I found really interesting what he explains. I'm going to leave the link below so you can read the full thesis. Of course, I'm not going to copy what he did because obviously it wouldn't be correct. I'm just taking ideas from what he says and giving it my personal twist, my personal opinion. So let's talk about the A380. The testers even mentioned, was it the 380 a success or is it a flop? Well, I think the opinions are a little bit conflicted, even for people that really love aviation. Let's put rivalries aside, like Boeing Airbus rivalries or 747 versus A380 aside. When we actually do this sort of thing, when we actually analyze this sort of thing, and we say that a specific aircraft might have been a flop, it's based on facts. It's based on the performance of the aircraft and all other factors that Christopher Nelson has mentioned in his thesis. And of course, the combination of all those factors may dictate the success or failure of an aircraft. By no means I would say that the A380 was a failure or it is a failure. It is not. It is a popular aircraft with passengers. And we are going to see why it is not as popular with airlines and the reasons behind it, according to this thesis, that I obviously agree with. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this video about it. So let's put a little bit of perspective on things and talk about the history of the A380. It is currently the biggest passenger aircraft in the market. We know that. It's huge. If you ever seen one, it is massive. It was introduced to the public in 2005. I still remember when it made a commercial voyage, just a presentation voyage to Sydney, and I remember seeing it landing and then seeing it taking off, and being in my balcony. I used to live in a suburb that was right next to Sydney Airport, and I saw that flight and I was extremely overjoyed. Even though I'm a 747 person, I was overjoyed to see that aircraft. And seeing her in the air, of course, it was a big event. It was a day of happiness for aviation in general, I would say. But its first commercial flight, which also involved Sydney, was done in 2007, and it was from Singapore to Sydney, operated by Singapore Airlines. Another flight that I also had the opportunity to see. That's the perks when you live right next to the airport. And not anymore, by the way. It was obviously, it is impossible to compare with its biggest rival, the 747. When it was launched, the comparisons came straight away. It was at the time considered, both of these aircraft have 4 engines. Both of these aircraft were considered the biggest passenger aircraft when they were launched, and both of them became very popular with passengers and airlines alike. At the beginning, it was like that, but was the 380 that popular with airlines? And this is why we are doing this video today, and this is what I am bringing you today. The Airbus can seat 853 passengers. This is the information I got from last week's video from Airbus. Nearly 35% more than the 747. Yes, we saw that this was the main selling point of the 380 was the fact that it had more capacity. At the time, airlines wanted more capacity and range. So it has a full double deck. Our Queen of the Skies only had a partial double deck. It's more silent and more fuel efficient. We all knew that, and I noticed on that very first flight that was just a presentation, a test flight to Sydney. You can tell straight away that when it's landing or taking off, the A380 is silent, is more silent than the 747 was at the time. As we saw on my last video, then the 747-8, Boeing claims that it also reduced significantly the noise from the 747 and obviously the fuel efficiency, because this has been the case for every single aircraft that is being released. Every time you release a new model of a new aircraft, of course, you are going to improve on things that might not be up to standard, and that's with every aircraft. So this is the situation. It was more fuel efficient, had a full double deck, so more capacity. It was lighter, and therefore it was greener. This was all the selling points the 380 had when it was launched. Airlines just jump on board, and a lot of airlines, including our Qantas, started ordering this aircraft. Qantas was one of the first airlines to get it as well. So why did the A380 stop production? What happened? If this was such a good start for this aircraft, if it was so popular, if it brought so much innovation, and it did indeed bring a lot of innovation when it was launched in 2007, the official commercial flight, it was really innovation for aviation. Why did, in the end, Airbus stop its production and airlines are walking away from it? Something must have happened. So, and now I'm gonna talk about the rise and fall of this aircraft, and obviously this is my personal opinion and based also on this thesis from Christopher Nelson. So, according to Dr. Nelson's thesis, What constitutes an aircraft success is the number of aircraft sold, the cost, popularity, passengers, preferences, and lifespan. This is what dictates its success. We can see that in all these categories, the 747 was really a winner. And especially when we consider the lifespan of the 747, it was definitely a winner. It was definitely, and it will always be, and I know I'm biased on this, but the 747 will always be a massive reference for aviation. It changed aviation, and it was an era. It was an era. It introduced a new era of flying, making it more accessible, making it more affordable, and in some ways faster for passengers. So I would say the 747 was in so many ways the enabler that created so many memories and so many happy holiday trips and the likes. So I think that is definitely there, and we can't deny that for the 747. So it's one of the things. This is what Christopher Nelson thinks are the categories that measure the success of an aircraft. And I agree. Just by looking at this factor, we can see a few downfalls already for the A380, and the lifespan, it's one of them. Let's start by the positives though. The A380 has a slightly bigger range, it's true. And that was one of the biggest price or selling points of this aircraft at the beginning. It was because it had high range, higher capacity. Airlines, this was the starting point of it. Airlines would be able to transport more passengers from A to B with, more capacity and obviously a bigger range. So they could go further and they could take more passengers. Of course, speed was never something that was discussed in for the A380. Speed is not one of its selling points. The selling point here was the increase in capacity and the increase in range. So the A380 can operate longer flights. So this was obviously something positive for the airlines at the time. Then the A380 obviously is silent, it's more silent and more fuel efficient. And this is been the case for every single aircraft that is introduced. They always come with more efficiency, with improvements that obviously will make that aircraft first more profitable, secondly more greener as well. It is another important factor these days, and aviation is always looking forward to that, because there's been overall an effort to decarbonize aviation and to get aviation as a greener sector. So, of course, all of this is always going to be the case, not only for the A380, but all other aircraft, even the 747, as I showed you last week with my video, the comparison between the two. Even Boeing did that with the last 747 to be produced, the 747-8. So, of course, this was going to be the case. Its popularity, it's also high with many airlines, and some made it a luxurious experience. So a lot of airlines sold the 380 as a luxurious experience for passengers. We all know that some even have those very, very famous first class suites where, for example, if you are a couple or even if you are traveling alone, you can pay and if you have the money to pay, you can pay for one first class suite, and you have a bed, you have a shower, you have a lounge. It's basically a suite. It's like a flying hotel, if you like. So a lot of airlines use this aircraft to cater for this type of flying, this type of experience. They cater for those who really wanted to have that experience, that pampering experience of having almost like an hotel-like experience inside an aircraft. So they made it all these luxurious. But of course, every airline would be aware that this was not going to be what made that aircraft profitable, because only a very small percentage of passengers would be able to afford an experience like this. And we all know a first class ticket is expensive, is extremely expensive, and most of us, of course, cannot afford something like that. So they were aware of that, but this was still a big price point, a big selling point for the A380 when it was released. The luxury, the luxury that you could find flying in that aircraft for a lot of airlines. So this was one of the things that luxury, that that experience. But even for economy, the legroom and amenities are better. If you compare other aircraft with the 380, because obviously it's a bigger aircraft, the airlines, some, of course, there's always going to be those airlines that are going to squeeze it to the max so they can put more passengers in, and of course that will sacrifice that leg room that we really need, obviously. But overall, I would say that for all airlines, even the economy cabin, it's a much better cabin than in most aircraft, including the 747. It has a bit more leg room, and everyone overall, it was very popular, and it still is very popular with passengers. They find it comfortable, and everyone is obviously pleased with the A380. Oh my God, I always go back for the 747. But the manufacturer only managed to sell 251 planes, according to the thesis, and the 747, for example, sold 1,500 planes. So obviously the lifespan was big, which was the other factor. The plane has high maintenance costs, and it's a logistics nightmare. We know that. And when the A380 was launched, many airports had to spend millions to accommodate her. That was to get the terminals ready for the A380, runways, etc. We all know that it was on the news at the time, and if you are really interested in aviation, you would know, because it was something that was said and discussed at the time. Although popular with passengers, the A380 is not as popular with airlines. Most of Airbus A380 clients are airlines from the Middle East, Middle East and Asia, who obviously have the capital to offset these high running costs, and after these airlines from Asia, I include here Singapore Airlines, but obviously they are included in the Asian market. After these Middle Eastern and Asian airlines, we only have a few. We have our Qantas that has the A380, British Airways, and Lufthansa from Europe. So overall, we didn't see this aircraft spreading across the board, like, for example, the 747. Airlines showed concerns about passenger revenue and suggested, and this is according to the thesis, as I said, I'm going to leave the link below so you can read it, and suggested a new A380 with only 2 engines and less capacity. But Airbus apparently refused this proposal, apparently claiming high costs for developing it. So, in my view, this might also have dictated the fate of the A380 because of this fact that Airbus simply refused to listen to what their clients were saying, the airlines that were operating this aircraft, and others that would possibly start using this aircraft should it become a bit more profitable, should it become a little less of a liability in terms of costs, maintenance costs, running costs, etc. So the low revenue rates, high running costs, and logistical problems ended up forcing Airbus to stop its production in 2021, and this was announced. Usually the lifespan of an aircraft is around 30 years. The A380 unfortunately didn't even reach half of it. So it's one of those things. It had a steep rise with the popularity, bigger range, bigger capacity, etc., etc. But then it had also a steep fall due to maintenance costs, running costs. A lot of airlines had to invest millions of dollars to update airports to be able to operate this aircraft due to because it has 2 decks and they had to have the jet bridges prepared to reach the two levels and the doors on the upper and lower level, which usually doesn't happen. Even with the 747, that was obviously a different arrangement. And of course, all of these weighed in on the success of this aircraft. So it's obvious, and then some airlines also are retiring. Now, my conclusion, based on all of this, and obviously my personal opinion. In my view, what have been one of the A380's main advantages ended up being its demise. Its increased capacity and size ended up being a logistics and rentability nightmare. So what at first was seen as something very positive and very could, or should I say, that could possibly be very profitable, ended up proving otherwise, because to operate that huge aircraft and have that huge capacity, the airports needed to be adapted to accommodate this aircraft. I remember, for example, when I was still traveling from Lisbon to Sydney before I moved definitely to Sydney, I remember at Heathrow Airport, Terminal 5 was being built specially to accommodate the 380. I remember that clearly. So, and Sydney Airport obviously also, and this was the case for airports that had to accommodate this aircraft. Runways had to be at a certain size, but that's always the case with every aircraft. And all these other factors that mean that running and operating this aircraft had a lot of perks, had a lot of benefits, but had a lot of liabilities as well. And this is one of them. It's the maintenance costs, is all the running costs associated with the aircraft that, of course, could mean that the airlines then started looking another way. Airports had to be adapted for it, as I said, and the passenger revenue was not as high as expected. Another factor that I strongly believe may have played a part on the A380's demise, especially in terms of capacity, was definitely the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, everything stopped, and of course the A380 was a recently new aircraft. It hadn't reached not even 10 years of its existence. Out of a sudden had to be grounded because aviation just stopped due to traveling restrictions, lockdowns, etc. Of course, it was a massive, massive loss for aviation all across the board. But of course, if you had to pay that huge amount of money, and according to this thesis, A380, the costs are $445.6 million for the A380. So if you have to pay this amount of money for one aircraft, and then you have to ground it, it's not making you any money. It's obviously gonna delay that return, delay that time where you get your money back and you start getting it to a profitable stage. So that, in my view, was also a really big part on the whole situation. And then the economic crisis that came after it, with, inflation, aviation also took a while to kick in because restrictions were seized in different ways all across the globe. Some countries started coming to a more normal approach earlier than others, and that obviously affected the way airlines could operate, because if one of the routes, the country of destiny, was not accepting passengers still, of course the airline could not operate those flights. There was also always some flights, but of course, due to the restrictions, those flights were most likely to be for people that were returning home. Some of the flights, like we had in Australia, were obviously sponsored by the government, bringing Australian citizens back home. So there was no tourism, there was no immigration, there was no tourism. Everything stopped, and of course it was a massive loss for aviation in general, and for the A380, of course. I think this ended up being the last nail in the 380's coffin, was the pandemic associated with the economic crisis that came afterwards, the high inflation, etc., etc. This ended up dictating its fate. Another thing is, and as I mentioned before, the aircraft is too expensive to buy. As I said, $445.6 million. So huge, according to the thesis, of course. Too expensive to run, and didn't bring the revenue the airlines were expected. And part of it might also be due to this factor that I said before, the pandemic associated with the crisis. People were not traveling because everything was so expensive that they couldn't afford to do it. So, changes in the market and the need to reduce emissions. We know that there's been a huge effort in aviation to reduce emissions and to get planes more and more and more fuel efficient, more and more and more greener. So this also played a part. So a turn to double engines, of course, because they are going to use less fuel, they're going to be greener, of course. The fact that Airbus refused to develop a possible A380 with only two engines saw the airlines walking away and replacing them with the Dreamliners. Again, going back to Boeing. We know that Boeing had that issue with the Maxes, that they had to ground them, etc., etc. But still, the Dreamliners have been a success, and people and airlines are embracing the Dreamliners for long range flights, for long haul flights, and they obviously are embracing those. And other two engine options, even with Airbus. The aircraft obviously is still popular. It is. People like to fly on the 380, and especially that luxury experience that a lot of airlines are offering. People still do that, and some may even save for that sort of experience, just like we had when the Concorde was flying. A lot of families, a lot of couples, a lot of people would save years and years and years to buy a ticket to go on the Concorde. I believe it might be a similar arrangement. A lot of people might save their money to have that experience of flying in first class on that business suite with one of the airlines that have the A380 and offer that type of luxury. Of course, it will always be popular, not only with aviation lovers like myself, but with the general public. Let's face it, the aircraft, it is actually wonderful. The experience is nice. I'm not saying otherwise, but it never reached the Queen's popularity. It never reached that popularity that the 747 has. And I guess it will never will. I know I'm biased here. Total disclaimer, I am very biased here. I will always say that I prefer the 747. However, I'm trying to be objective here. I'm trying to be neutral. And this is the facts that were presented to me as per why A380, that was this innovation, there was this massive positive for the aviation industry, out of a sudden stopped production, and it's meeting its end, because the airlines that currently use them will obviously keep on using for a while, but eventually Airbus is not producing any further A380s. The airlines that have it will keep on maintaining, etc., and eventually it will end up being retired. I know Qantas at least retired one of its A380s, and other airlines are thinking about doing the same. So if I'm going to say something, I would say that it is sad, because I think it would have had all the characteristics and all the possibilities to become a very, very popular aircraft, just like the Queen of the Skies. However, it didn't reach that. And for me, I still believe that the period between 2019 and 2022 was one of the big factors that may have led to this outcome, because obviously, either we like it or not, the world of aviation changed completely. The way people flew then, it's not the way we fly now. It's different. Things changed, regulations were imposed, everything. And the fact that airlines were virtually grounded for 2 years obviously played a huge part on what they're gonna do next, because it was basically 2 years of minimal profit, or if any at all, and they have to do something to recoup that money. And at the moment, the 380 is not giving them that, because although it's popular with passengers, the income they get from the aircraft may not offset the running costs, and that's why it's slowly coming to the end of another era in aviation, with the 380 possibly being retired way sooner than it would be considered the normal lifespan of an aircraft. This was my opinion. As I said, I'll leave the link below so you can see the thesis in full and all of the factors that this person presented for his analysis and for his conclusion. And of course, I'm always open for your opinion and more discussion. So for today, I hope you liked this Gadget Report. Let me know what do you think, independently of what may be your opinion, what might be your favorite, if you are a 747 person like myself or not. Let me know what do you think, what in your opinion led to the A380 not being that massive success. For example, the 747 was. Almost all airlines were using it. Qantas at one stage was one of the biggest clients of Boeing for that. And, and we would expect that when the 380 was launched, it would have a similar success, and that didn't happen at all. So what is your opinion? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with this thesis? And do you think it might have been really the running costs, the whole thing associated with running this aircraft? Or do you think there might have been other factors that may have played a part in the A380's demise? If you have any other topics that you would like me to discuss in this Gadget Report, please feel free to leave me a comment below and suggest. I'm always happy to accommodate all your suggestions. And of course, if you have anything to say, if you liked the video, or if you have anything to say that maybe you didn't agree, please feel free, leave a comment below. I'm very happy to answer. I believe that all comments are valid if they are done respectfully, of course. And if you have a different opinion from mine, it's as legit as mine. So if you have a different opinion, please leave me a comment below. Let's discuss it. Let's see what's your point of view, and maybe we can change our mind, or maybe I can change my mind. Put a like on the video and subscribe the channel with a little click on the bell so you get a notification of a new Gadget Report every week. A lot of you do, but a lot of you don't. I have said this many times already. A lot of you come and don't put that like and don't subscribe the channel. It's totally free, and what it really does is that it helps the algorithm to pick up that my channel has more viewers, has more subscriptions and likes, etc., and will distribute my content to more people. So I would reach a much bigger audience. I'm very happy. The channel is growing. I'm having more and more viewers every single week, which I am very thankful for. It wouldn't be possible if you guys were not on that side. But please, if you really like my channel, if you like to hear me talking about it, our gadgets, please put a like and subscribe to the channel. Before I go, I would like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week Have a good one. Bye.